6 months ago, I'd been Edison Technologies' go-to systems architect, the woman who could make any computer sing opera if needed. My cubicle overflowed with ancient manuals, backup drives older than most interns, and a coffee mug that read "I turn coffee into code." The newer employees called my workspace the Museum of Forgotten Tech, but when systems crashed at 3 a.m., my phone always rang first. My desk was a carefully orchestrated chaos that made perfect sense to me. Rubber bands held together circuit diagrams from 1987, post-it notes marked critical pages in manuals that companies had stopped printing, and a collection of adapters could connect any device to any other device, given enough creativity and duct tape. I'd salvaged that duct tape from the IT supply closet after they'd modernized to double-sided foam adhesive strips that couldn't hold a paperclip to a bulletin board. The crown jewel of my collection was my backup laptop, a thick, indestructible machine from 2008 that could run diagnostic software on systems the manufacturers had forgotten existed. It weighed roughly 12 pounds, took 4 minutes to boot up, and made sounds like a small aircraft during startup. But it had never failed me, unlike the sleek tablets everyone else carried that died if you looked at them wrong. Until Stuart Blackwell arrived as Chief Information Officer with his designer suits, wireless everything philosophy, and an unfortunate habit of snorting when he laughed. He drove a Tesla that parked itself, wore a smartwatch that monitored his breathing patterns, and carried a tablet thinner than most magazines. During the first all-hands meeting, he'd pointed directly at me while announcing the Great Banking System Modernization Project. "We need visionaries, not dinosaurs," he'd chuckled, adjusting his smartwatch that was probably tracking his smugness levels. "This company requires forward-thinking architects who understand cloud-native solutions and AI-driven protocols. Clients don't even know your name, Clara. They want innovation, not ancient history." His presentation slides featured buzzwords like synergistic ecosystem integration and blockchain-adjacent transparency frameworks. I'd counted 17 different fonts on a single slide, each one apparently representing a different aspect of revolutionary user experience optimization. The slide transitions included swooshing sounds and sparkle effects that would have been embarrassing in 1995. I said nothing, simply nodding while mentally cataloging every shortcut Stuart's team would inevitably take. I watched them dismantle my carefully constructed backup systems with the confidence of people who'd never experienced a real disaster. They removed my redundant power supplies because they were aesthetically disruptive to the modern server environment. They deleted my monitoring scripts because the new AI-powered dashboard would proactively predict issues before they occurred using machine learning algorithms. My favorite moment was watching them try to remove what they called legacy cable spaghetti from behind the main server rack. I'd organized those cables in a specific pattern that allowed for quick troubleshooting and easy replacement. They spent 2 hours untangling everything and reorganizing it according to a color-coded system they'd found in a blog post about feng shui for server rooms. Day 1 of the new system launch began with Stuart's victory lap through the office, high-fiving anyone within reach and taking selfies with the modernized server room. The dashboard displayed real-time transaction data in animated charts that danced across multiple monitors. Customers logged in seamlessly through biometric authentication, mobile deposits processed faster than ever, and the AI chatbot answered 97% of customer service calls without human intervention. I spent day 1 organizing my desk drawers and updating my resume, occasionally glancing at the real-time monitoring system I'd built years ago but no longer had permission to access. The error logs showed minor glitches, nothing catastrophic, just small inconsistencies that experienced system administrators would recognize as early warning signs. Unfortunately, Stuart's team consisted entirely of people who'd learned system administration from YouTube videos and certification boot camps. Day 2 brought the first hiccup: a few customers couldn't access savings accounts during peak morning hours. Stuart's team blamed user error and posted helpful tutorial videos on the company website. The videos featured upbeat music and animated mascots explaining how to optimize your digital banking experience through intuitive interface navigation. I watched the error logs multiply like rabbits, each entry representing a small crack in the foundation Stuart had built on top of my original architecture. The new system was essentially a beautiful sports car built on a bicycle frame, impressive from the outside, but structurally unsound under pressure. My monitoring tools detected temperature fluctuations in the server room, probably because Stuart's team had repositioned the cooling vents for improved visual aesthetics. Day 3 featured intermittent timeouts during peak hours, causing customer transactions to hang in digital limbo for several minutes before completing or failing mysteriously. Stuart held an emergency meeting in the conference room with the glass walls, gesturing dramatically while his team nodded and took notes on tablets that kept running out of battery. "We're experiencing some scaling challenges," Stewart announced, his smartwatch buzzing with stress monitoring alerts. "The AI suggests implementing load balancing optimization protocols across distributed server clusters." Nobody asked what any of that actually meant, because it sounded sufficiently technical to be impressive. I noticed the building's air conditioning struggling more than usual, probably from the server room's increased heat output. Stewart's visually optimized server arrangement had blocked 2 cooling vents and positioned heat-generating equipment directly under the main air return. It was like putting a space heater inside a refrigerator and expecting both to work efficiently. Day 4 started with a bang, literally. The main cooling unit for the server room gave up with a sound like a dying elephant being strangled by a vacuum cleaner. The noise echoed through the building's ventilation system, causing several people to look up from their desks in confusion. Stewart's revolutionary system was attempting to process the morning's transaction queue, approximately 50,000 banking operations that needed to complete before 9 a.m. to avoid regulatory penalties. Within minutes, servers began overheating faster than birthday candles in a furnace. The automatic shutdown protocols kicked in to prevent permanent hardware damage, but Stewart's team had modified the shutdown sequence to minimize service interruption through graceful degradation. Instead of shutting down cleanly, servers began shutting down randomly, creating a cascading failure that locked out every customer account and froze $200 million in pending transfers. The emergency backup protocol tried to engage, but it no longer existed because Stewart had deemed it legacy redundancy that inhibited system efficiency. The backup servers were there, humming quietly in their racks, but they had no instructions for taking over operations because the switchover scripts were stored on the servers that had just shut down. Stewart burst through my office door like a caffeinated rhinoceros wearing a business suit, his perfectly styled hair disheveled and standing at angles that defied both gravity and professional styling products. His smartwatch was buzzing frantically with alerts, creating a soundtrack that sounded like an angry bee trapped in a tiny disco. His designer shirt had mysterious stains that suggested he'd been wrestling with actual hardware, possibly losing the fight. "Why is every customer locked out of their accounts with $200 million frozen?" he shouted, waving his tablet like a medieval weapon while his other hand gesticulated wildly enough to direct air traffic. The system was supposed to be bulletproof. My team assured me the AI-powered monitoring would prevent exactly this scenario. Behind him, I could see members of his team clustered around monitors in the hallway, their expressions ranging from panic to confusion to the kind of thousand-yard stare usually associated with battlefield trauma. Someone was on the phone with technical support, presumably explaining to a vendor that their enterprise-grade solution had just spectacularly failed during peak business hours. "Your team removed my failsafes," I interrupted, not looking up from my crossword puzzle. 7 down was catastrophic system failure, which seemed appropriate. They called them legacy bloat that inhibited scalability potential. "Fix it. Now." Stewart slammed his hand on my desk with enough force to make my coffee mug jump, knock over my pencil holder, and send ancient backup disks sliding across the surface like hockey pucks on ice. The disks scattered onto the floor, where they spun in lazy circles before coming to rest under my filing cabinet. One particularly old disk, labeled Emergency Recovery Protocols 2019 in my careful handwriting, skittered across the room and came to rest against Stewart's Italian leather shoe. He stared down at it as if it were a time bomb, which, in a sense, it was. That disk contained the recovery procedures for exactly this situation, procedures his team had deleted from the main system because they were incompatible with modern architecture paradigms. I finally looked up from my crossword, setting down my pen with deliberate slowness. "I don't have system access anymore, remember? You gave my credentials to an AI chatbot because it was more efficient than human oversight and eliminated the possibility of operator error." The irony was delicious. Stewart's AI chatbot was currently offline because it ran on the same servers that were busy melting down in the next room. The system designed to eliminate human error had created an error so spectacular that humans were the only ones who could fix it. Stewart's face cycled through several shades of panic, pale white, sickly green, and finally settling on desperate purple that clashed terribly with his designer tie. "I'll give you whatever access you need. Administrative privileges, root access, anything. Just stop this nightmare before the regulatory investigators arrive." I stood slowly, stepping carefully over the coffee puddle and scattered disks. My knees protested after sitting in the same position for too long, creating small popping sounds that echoed in the sudden silence. I'll need my old workstation, administrative privileges on all systems, and probably a ladder. Your beautiful new server room is about to become my playground. The server room resembled the aftermath of a digital tornado that had been particularly vindictive toward cooling systems. Overheated machines beeped their distress signals in a cacophony that sounded like a robot orchestra tuning their instruments badly. Emergency fans whirred helplessly against the rising temperature, creating wind patterns that blew loose cables around like party streamers at a very depressing celebration. Stewart's team clustered around monitors, typing furiously with the desperation of people who'd realized their YouTube-based education hadn't covered catastrophic system failure recovery. They'd managed to achieve nothing except increased perspiration and several mild panic attacks. The smell of overheated electronics mixed with nervous human sweat created an atmosphere that could only be described as corporate desperation with hints of burning silicon. I surveyed the chaos with the detached interest of a bomb disposal expert examining a particularly creative explosive device. I'd brought my toolkit, a battered metal case that looked like it had survived multiple wars but contained cables, adapters, and devices that predated the iPhone, Instagram, and Stewart's confidence in modern technology. My first attempt to access the main server involved climbing on a rolling chair to reach the elevated diagnostic ports that Stewart's team had installed for improved cable management aesthetics. The chair had 5 wheels, which seemed stable until I needed to actually reach for something. The wheels decided to explore the room independently, each one rolling in a different direction like a confused starfish. I managed to grab the server rack for support, but my momentum carried the chair away from under me, leaving me dangling from fiber optic cables 6 feet above the ground. The cables held my weight admirably, but the server rack began to sway ominously, creating a domino effect that threatened to topple 3 adjacent racks filled with millions of dollars worth of equipment. My second approach required balancing on a stack of server manuals while Stewart held my ankles and shouted what he probably thought was encouragement but sounded more like the panicked commentary of a sports announcer watching his team lose by 40 points. The manual stack included database administration for dummies, cloud computing in 30 days, and AI integration for executives who don't understand AI. This worked until the database administration for dummies manual, apparently not designed for load-bearing purposes, slipped out from under my feet. I tumbled backward into a rack of backup drives that had been organized according to Stewart's color-coded system but not actually secured to anything substantial. The drives toppled like dominoes across 3 server rows, creating a cascade of blinking lights and error beeps that sounded like a computerized stampede. My third plan involved the maintenance ladder, which had been hiding behind a decoratively arranged cluster of networking equipment that served no functional purpose but looked dynamically innovative in photographs. The ladder seemed sturdy until I realized halfway up that it was designed for changing light bulbs in drop ceilings, not supporting someone wrestling with fiber optic cables while balancing ancient diagnostic equipment. The ladder swayed ominously as I connected my prehistoric diagnostic device to the primary server, my movements becoming increasingly frantic as customer complaint calls flooded the help desk phones below. Through the server room's glass walls, I could see the customer service team fielding calls with expressions that suggested they were explaining to customers why their money had temporarily vanished into the digital ether. My diagnostic device, a tank-like laptop that weighed roughly 12 pounds and made sounds like a small aircraft during operation, refused to recognize the server's modern interfaces until I dug through my toolkit for a collection of adapters that could probably connect a toaster to the International Space Station given sufficient creativity. The breakthrough came when my prehistoric diagnostic tool, a device Stewart had mockingly called archaeological equipment from the Jurassic period of computing, successfully interfaced with the new system's underlying architecture through a combination of 3 different adapters, 2 cable converters, and what appeared to be pure technological stubbornness. Despite all the sleek modern interfaces, animated dashboards, and AI-powered monitoring systems, the core banking protocols still spoke the same language I'd learned 30 years ago. The fundamental architecture was still there, buried under layers of unnecessary complexity like a perfectly good house hidden behind decorative facades that served no structural purpose. My fingers flew across the ancient keyboard, which made satisfying clicking sounds that echoed through the server room like a mechanical typewriter composing the world's most important document. I typed commands that bypassed every fancy security layer, every AI-powered monitoring system, and every user-friendly interface Stewart's team had installed. The recovery process was like performing surgery on a patient who'd been decorated with glitter and ribbons. I had to cut through all the unnecessary additions to reach the vital organs underneath. One by one, frozen customer accounts unlocked with small electronic chimes that sounded like digital birds celebrating their freedom. Transaction queues resumed processing, creating a steady stream of data that flowed across my diagnostic screen like a river that had finally found its proper course. The $200 million in limbo began finding its way to appropriate destinations, each successful transaction marked by a small green checkmark on my screen. I watched years of customer trust being restored one deposit at a time, each completed transaction representing someone's mortgage payment, business payroll, or grocery money returning from digital purgatory. As the last server status light turned from angry red to peaceful green, I descended the ladder with the dignity of someone who hadn't just saved a major financial institution while hanging from ceiling tiles, wrestling with rolling chairs, and dodging toppling server racks. The room had finally begun to cool as the air conditioning system caught up with the crisis, creating blessed relief that felt like a technological winter arriving after a very hot summer. Stuart watched in stunned silence as I packed my ancient tools, each device a relic that had somehow orchestrated a miracle of digital resurrection. His smartwatch had stopped buzzing, either because the crisis was over or because it had finally died from stress-induced electronic exhaustion. "How did you?" Stuart began, his voice carrying the same tone people use when asking magicians to explain obviously impossible tricks. "Sometimes," I said, closing my toolkit with a satisfying snap that echoed through the newly quiet server room, "the old ways work because they were built by people who understood that everything eventually breaks, and when it does, you need tools that were designed to fix things rather than just look impressive in presentations." The building's air conditioning finally caught up with the crisis, flooding the server room with blessed coolness just as I headed for the door. Behind me, Stuart's team began the slow process of explaining to management why their revolutionary system had needed rescue by equipment old enough to remember when the internet was still a novelty. 6 months later, I occupied a corner office with a title that included both senior and architect in impressive font sizes, along with emergency systems recovery specialist and a salary that reflected my newly recognized value to Edison Technologies' continued existence. My new workspace still overflowed with backup drives and ancient manuals, but now they were joined by cutting-edge equipment and a coffee maker sophisticated enough to probably run banking software if properly configured with the right adapters. The office had floor-to-ceiling windows that provided an excellent view of the server room, where my monitoring systems now ran alongside Stuart's modernized interfaces. I'd negotiated for backup power systems, redundant cooling, and emergency protocols that couldn't be deleted by anyone ranking below senior vice president. Most importantly, I'd insisted on keeping my ancient diagnostic equipment in a place of honor, properly maintained and ready for the next crisis that would inevitably arrive. Stuart, meanwhile, had discovered the joys of redundancy planning and actually listened when I suggested keeping legacy systems for emergencies. He'd even started collecting vintage computing equipment, though his attempts to understand my methods usually ended with him tangled in cables, accidentally shutting down non-critical systems, or calling the help desk to ask why his monitor was displaying everything upside down. His latest hobby involved learning to use command line interfaces, which he approached with the enthusiasm of someone discovering fire. I'd caught him practicing basic commands on a spare terminal, typing with 2 fingers while consulting a printed manual that he'd highlighted in 3 different colors. His smartwatch now monitored his stress levels during these sessions, presumably to prevent another panic-induced office invasion. During our weekly planning meetings, Stuart would sometimes catch me smiling as I watched him struggle with concepts I'd mastered when he was still learning to walk. But he never complained any more about dinosaurs, visionaries, or the aesthetic disruption of functional backup systems. After all, when the next crisis inevitably arrived, and we both knew it would, he wanted the woman with the ancient toolkit and the institutional knowledge on his side. I kept my old coffee mug on the new desk, right next to a framed photo of the server room ceiling tiles I'd accidentally destroyed during the great banking crisis of Tuesday afternoon. Some victories deserved proper commemoration, especially ones that involved falling through ceilings, wrestling with outdated ladders, and proving that sometimes the best technology is the kind that works when everything else fails spectacularly. The mug still read "I turn coffee into code," but now everyone understood that it wasn't just a clever slogan, it was a job description that had saved Edison Technologies from becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of forgetting why backup systems exist in the first place.